Nick's in Ilford. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hi, I have to disagree with you, James, about what this guy did was wrong, because I think at the very least it's highlighted the whole hypocrisy around this situation in Israel. I think if this guy had been chanting something like death to Russians, it wouldn't even be on a story. Nobody would be talking about it. But it's the politicians that seem to be screaming the loudest. And they're the exact ones that could actually do something about what's going on in Palestine or Israel.
I don't think he has advanced anybody's cause, Nick, and deep down, nor do you.
No, I think it's because I think he has, because I think people
you think he's drawn attention to something that you were already completely aware of and convinced of.
No, but I think there's a lot of people out there that don't know what to think. They don't know whether to think that. Obviously, you've got people that are out and out pro-Israel, people that are out and out pro-Palestine. But there's people in the middle, and there's a lot of people out there that are nervous to speak up. You spoke about why it's easier to get into this subject than the actual slaughter, and it's very simple. And it's the word anti-Semitic or anti-Jew. The minute this happened, most of the news reports I heard were saying anti-Jew statements. Even within the LBC news round, it was anti-Jew statements. There was nothing anti-Jew.
I don't think it was. I think it was anti-Israel.
No, very clearly anti-Jew.
Well,
anti-Jewish statement.
I haven't heard that myself, but to be honest, I'm not as plugged into the news over the weekend as I am during the week, so I'll let that pass. But I've certainly not seen that anywhere, except in opinion, except in texts and messages. And it's a view you have to at least acknowledge. The idea that if you call for death to members of the IDF, you are calling for death to a group made up almost entirely of Jews.
That might be the case, but it's also going to be made up because of their policies of people's serving.
You're not calling for them to be killed because they are Jewish. You're calling them to be killed because they are part of a group that you believe is engaged in genocide. But you're still calling for people to be killed.
Listen, let me just say, I don't want deaths to anyone. I want all these wars around the world to stop right now. The point is that it's been twisted to Jew. It happens to be Jewish within the IDF, but the main point that I wanted to make is if the exact same thing had happened and it happened to be a Russian organisation of soldiers, it wouldn't even have got the slightest peep from the media or anybody.
This is where the gulf between public opinion in this country and public discourse, as dictated and defined by the media, is, absolutely enormous. Because, the idea that your comparison is wrong because Russia illegally invaded Ukraine when Israel stands accused of breaking multiple laws, international laws, not just with regards to war crimes, but repeatedly and permanently with regards to illegal settlements. For an entirely objective observer, it would be very difficult to work out what the entirely objective criteria for criminality is here. And you think that this character has drawn attention to that imbalance, to that perceived hypocrisy.
Good afternoon, Sheila. I'm a barrister. I often actually come on as a guest on LBC.
Jeremy Dean.
Yes.
Yes, hello.
Well spotted, thank you. Sheila, first of all, I'd just like to say that your previous caller is reflecting the experiences and concerns of the Jewish community, including myself, across this country. And when people listen to a call like hers, they need to understand that this is what is happening to Jewish people throughout the United Kingdom in 2025. The law needs to be radically altered now. And unfortunately, the powers that be are doing nothing about that. The conversations that you played earlier, or the short clips you played earlier from the Commissioner and Sadiq Khan, are simply lip service to what's required. What we need in this country today is law which categorically demands that if words are uttered capable of damaging the Jewish people, capable of prejudicing the Jewish people, capable of stirring up anti-Semitism, the law must be changed to enforce that today, because someone and some people are going to be killed otherwise very soon.
What changes? You want changes above and beyond existing hate laws and incitement laws, do you?
Sheila, I do, absolutely. And I've been calling for these for a long time. And obviously there isn't time now to rehearse the technicalities of the very limited public order legislation that's in force at the moment. We need law that prevents people like that. I mean, I don't quite know what word to use for the person who stood on the stage at Glastonbury. But up to 30,000 people, let's say half of that audience, attach themselves to his comments.
I think it sounded like more than half to me.
Well, Sheila, if it was, then potentially 20,000 people should be guilty of a criminal offence in this country today. They're not as the law stands. But calling for death, calling for killing, is not what British society is all about, but it's becoming the norm in this country. And the powers that be are standing by and letting it happen. It happened in Nazi Germany, and we all know what follows. And it must be stopped. And the law is the most lethal weapon.
It's interesting, isn't it, that the pushback, immediate pushback on the the Palestine Action group, and whether they will be prescribed or not. I mean, we'll see whether they're prescribed. It looks, clearly the government is going to attempt to prescribe them, but it looks like it might come to a vote in Parliament based on the initial statement from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. But already other groups not facing prescription are saying they will openly speak for Palestine Action and say we stand with Palestine Action. If that is tens of thousands of people on marches through central London, what then? Arrest every single person who has a Palestine Action banner? Because we've left a fair few rum ones out there with no arrests already.
Well, Sheila, your question, as always, is a good question, but I'm afraid the answer to that question is yes, because...
Okay, well, I just wondered, because, I guess in law, of course it is. Of course that's the answer, but that's some job, that's some challenge.
Well, Sheila, it may be. And let me just stress, the law as it stands would not militate in favour of arresting 20,000 people. That's why it needs changing. But I'm afraid the Jewish community has lived peacefully in this country for centuries and contributed to British society and has enhanced the life of the United Kingdom. And we, and I include myself, we are now being assaulted, abused, threatened and intimidated. That means 10,000 people being arrested. Should the law change, so be it.
And then what? Can't put them in prison. What do we do?
Well, look, Sheila, that is obviously a $10 billion question. But for my purposes, in terms of speaking to you today, and obviously, everyone knows that you are the voice of reason, I am simply making clear, as a Jew and as a very experienced lawyer, that the law is not protecting the Jewish community. And I'm not sure that the appropriate thing, if I may say so, is to look ahead to the ramifications of changing the law. It just needs to be tightened up to protect us.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy. Let's talk more about that another time when we've got more time. We're not focused on this. Thank you very much for your call. That's Jeremy.
What the BBC actually do, they assure what we call freedom of speech in this country. That is what they enhance there.
Yeah, but there has to be a responsibility for that right.
Listen, Glastonbury goes on for 2 days. The event we were talking about is for 3 days, is for 20 minutes within that 3 days. 3 days. Now, what...
if you're going to try and defend it as 20 minutes over 3 days, that is ludicrous.
Okay, well, I'm not going to defend...
I mean, that is like saying I drive 10,000 miles a year, so come on, for 50 miles I can drive completely drunk without a seatbelt or the lights on. I mean, that is just ridiculous, Ty.
Mr. Ferrari, now
Mr.
what
Ty.
happened this morning, the people that you're defending, the Israeli soldier...
No, you get it wrong. No. I'm not defending the Israeli soldiers. They don't need defending. I'm just trying to uphold law in this country.
I know, I understand that. Yeah. They just order evacuation order for North Gaza. That's the 46th time. They just order evacuation order for North Gaza this morning.
Sorry, they question the order over Gaza?
No, they just order evacuation order.
They just ordered. I'm so sorry. They've just ordered an evacuation. Right. Okay. Yep.
This morning. So what happened from the time immemorial? I remember singing to free Nelson Mandela. We always use musical event to highlight things. I remember John Lennon. Imagine. I remember. Do they have Christmas?
Memories. Whoa! So what? You remember? Imagine. You remember? Do they Christmas over there?
Yeah.
Why are we going through your musical memories?
Because what happened is we always use music. They always use a musical event.
Yeah, but hold on. I don't remember John Lennon chanting that we should death to a certain military organisation, or Bob Geldof and Midge Ure suggesting it. I don't think you're quite on the same 45 or the same LP.
I just wanted to say that I was in the crowd, and my experience is actually very different to the journalist that you spoke to.
Okay.
I didn't feel that it was full of hatred. I think Glastonbury is genuinely a place of peace and tolerance. And although I totally disagree with the chant, and no one near me was joining in that chant, so when it's being reported that the whole crowd joined in, I just wanted to say that with that particular chant, they didn't join in. And there were people with Palestinian flags, with badges, there was a lot of obviously pro-Palestinian people around, but they didn't all join in with the violent chant. I'm a non-violent resistance person. I don't believe in hating anybody, and I think that would be true for a lot of people that were there.
Did you hear what another of our callers reported to me, that after the chant, Bob Vylan, the performer in Bob Vylan, said violent resistance is the only way?
Yeah, and I don't agree with that. And I think there's been so much emphasis on Bob Vylan, but actually nearly all the artists I went to see spoke about Palestine.
But it's isn't it? It's what they said. It's not totally. That they said something. Yeah, that was to be... Everybody does every 5 minutes, it seems to me, if they're celebrities. It's what they said.
But and also because Glastonbury is a platform, isn't it? And also we need to tell our government that we don't agree with them, with them selling arms or trading arms with Israel. We want our government to know how we feel, and that is a way of artists being able to do it. But it is how they do it. And I think Nadine Shah did an amazing speech on the other stage, and I think there should be emphasis on people like her who were speaking about non-violence. So she read out a letter by the Palestine, forgive me if I get the wrong, the Palestine Action, who have spoken today about being prescribed, about being a terrorist organisation. But I really just ask people to go and listen to her speech and find out what she said and how she said it, because I think the emphasis should be on what people were talking about in terms of talking about... Was she saying essentially that it shouldn't be prescribed? She was, but she was very clear about the fact that, and I'm not saying I'm not a member of that group, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying if there's going to be media attention, I think being attention on somebody like Nadine Shah's statement where she was talking about being a pacifist, about the fact that doesn't agree with violence towards any individual people, and it's individual people being hurt that people are trying to stop. So I just wanted to say that that's just not my experience. Glastonbury's always been a left-wing political place, and there were so many artists were speaking out against the atrocities that are happening in Gaza, but with a lot more love. And also just to say that people in the crowd were not necessarily complicit with what Bob Vylan was saying. So I totally understand. Well, it's good to hear, and I'm glad you called to say that. There was, from what I saw and heard, it was a sizable number because it was very loud joining in. What did you feel at that time that stopped you from joining in? You must have made a judgment of some sort in that moment. Yeah, because death to the IDF, I think talking about the organisation of the IDF is one thing. I think if you're not being very clear in what you're saying, I realise young people are conscripted into the IDF, so it's not even... People in the IDF don't even necessarily have a choice or feel like they have a choice about the actions that they're being asked to take. That's tricky, isn't it? So true of every army. Yeah, true of every army. So, conscript army, although the IDF as an organisation, I of course like everyone, disgusted with the actions that are being taken currently. That doesn't mean I would ever wish death or hatred upon anybody. Whose actions specifically? Whose actions? Yeah. I think the scale of what has happened in Gaza, of course, October the 7th, it's abominable, it's awful, I don't feel like I have to say both. Yeah, of course, all that stuff.
I think we do have to say both. I constantly say both, because it seemed to me there was a certain phase where people, it happened very quickly, didn't it? The tearing down of the hostage photos was the start of it. It was as though the people that did that, it seemed to me, did not have your capacity, Claire, to think and to do what you did and to feel what you do about the whole thing. They had no room in their heart for the suffering of Jews. That's what the ripping down of the hostages was about. And you and I have capacity in my heart for the suffering of Palestinians and for the suffering of Jewish people. And we can have separate discussions about Israel and about Hamas and the governments of, but the people who would... And by the way, the Smotriches of this world are just as bad on the other side of the fence. Who have no capacity in their heart for the suffering of Gazans. But there's plenty of that, and the reason I think you have to remind people about Hamas and the hostages is because a lot of people want to forget it.
But I also think when it comes to Gaza and what's happening, I think we as a people who want to protest against
must be allowed to,
and governments, so we need to raise our voices to tell our government
and raise them well. I think
this
is the thing, raise them well. Yeah.
So I just ask people to concentrate on some of the other speeches and protests and action that was happening at Glastonbury.
And if Claire, and I'm not clearly holding you responsible for this, but if there's the red triangle of resistance, and which is it amounts to death to Israel. Did you see? I mean, I've seen photographs taken in Glastonbury that this sign was up. I mean, did you see that?
No. If
you had, how would that have made you feel? Same as the chant made you feel, maybe?
Yeah, I feel very strongly about what's happening in Gaza, very strongly. But I also don't believe in hatred of anybody, and I think that's so I can hate people's actions, if you see what I mean. I can disagree with that.
We can all hate to see what's happening to human beings.
Yeah. So I'd just like to say that what happened in Glastonbury may be a good thing. I think that spreading awareness is very important. I think that you're complicit if you stay silent about what's happening in Palestine. Of course, I understand that the chants that there were death, I wouldn't cause death on anyone, but at the same time, they are causing death on children. So you have to understand.
I mean, the other side of that argument is, of course, it would all end tomorrow if Hamas gave up what is sadly, I've got to say, with the remaining terrorists that are still alive.
Yeah, but we have to understand that you have.
Would you like to respond? Would you respond to that?
On the right side of history.
No. Of course, would you respond to that though? If Hamas gave up the hostages, it would end.
No, it's not about that.
Well, no. You might not say it's about that, but currently it's my show, and I've decided it is about that. So, will you respond? Excuse me. Would you respond to that?
Standing on the wrong side of history.
No. Stop saying that you've read in a book somewhere. Do you agree that if Hamas gave up the terrorists, then... if Hamas gave up the hostages, if the terrorists gave up the hostages, it would be coming to an end there, cause...
They will still get bombed. Palestine will still get bombed.
No, they wouldn't.
They will, yes, they will.
What are you, head of the IDF? How do you know?
No, because they've been doing it ever since. That's all they do.
Because they want the return of the
civilians.
What don't you get? They want the return of the hostages.
Why are you standing up for the IDF?
I'm not. I've tried again. I'm trying to uphold, thank you, I'm trying to uphold law, and to me, there has been a clear breach of the law here. The IDF don't need me to support them. They seem to be a supremely sufficient military force. But the one thing I'm worried about is upholding laws in this country.